Okay, let's set the scene. The year is 1859. We're at Niagara Falls, and a man named Charles Blondin is about to do something that has the entire world holding its breath. And in the process, he's going to teach us all a really powerful lesson, not just about balance, but about what it truly means to trust someone.
So just picture it. You've got a crowd of 25,000 people packed along the gorge. Down below, the water is just roaring, and way up high, there's a single hemp rope, just a few inches wide, stretched right over that massive chasm. Now, Blondin has already crossed it before, a bunch of times actually, so when he shows up with a wheelbarrow, the crowd just goes wild. They've seen what he can do, they believe 100% that he can make it across.
And this is where everything changes. After all that thunderous cheering, after all that belief, Blondin turns to the crowd and he asks this simple but honestly terrifying question. And just like that, complete silence. That huge crowd of believers goes quiet. Because, it's one thing to believe someone can do something from way over on the safe side. It's a whole other thing to actually trust them with your life.
So who was this guy? Who was this man who could command that kind of attention and then, with just a few words, create this total crisis of faith? Well, it turns out this incredible daredevil was basically a prodigy right from the start.
Yeah, his real name was actually Jean-Francois Grivelet, and he was from France. He supposedly found his calling when he was just 4 years old, balancing on a rope that was strung up between two chairs in his living room. He was just a natural. His manager even said later that he walked the rope like a bird flies through the air.
And his talent was just undeniable. I mean, look at this. By age 5, he was already in formal training. By 6, he was performing for the public as the Boy Wonder. He built this amazing career, toured America, and eventually, he set his sights on the absolute biggest challenge he could think of: Niagara Falls.
And what a challenge that was. We're not talking about just, a simple walk from point A to point B. We're talking about him turning one of the most dangerous places on Earth into his own personal stage for some serious performance art.
This really puts the stakes into perspective. He had a rope that was 1,100 feet long, hanging 160 feet above that violent, churning water. There was no safety net, no helicopter on standby, nothing. It was just him, his skill, and a balancing pole. A single, tiny misstep, and it was all over.
And he didn't just walk it once and call it a day. Oh no, he turned it into a full-blown spectacle. He crossed it blindfolded, inside a sack, on stilts. He even carried a small stove out to the middle of the rope, cooked an omelet, and then lowered it down to the tourists on the Maid of the Mist boat down below. I mean, can you even imagine?
And this wasn't some one-time fluke. Over his career, he crossed that chasm about 300 times. And every single time, he pushed the limits just a little bit further, building up his legend and cementing that absolute belief in the crowds that came to watch him. Which, of course, brings us right back to that silent crowd and the very heart of this story. Because Blondin created these two moments that perfectly capture that huge difference between simply believing in someone and truly actually trusting them.
And right here, this is the core of it all. On one side, you have belief. That's the loud, confident cheering from the safety of the riverbank. But on the other side, you have trust. And that's the deafening silence that happens when there's real personal risk involved. The crowd, they had plenty of belief. But trust, they didn't have it.
Well, almost nobody had it. There was one person who was willing to step off the riverbank and onto that rope, his manager and friend, Harry Colcord. He actually agreed to be carried across on Blondin's back, which would be, by far, the most dangerous crossing of all.
Now, before they started, Blondin gave him these absolutely chilling instructions. This wasn't about just being a passenger along for the ride. This was about total surrender. It was about them becoming a single entity. Colcord had to give up all control, every single instinct for self-preservation, and put his life completely and totally in Blondin's hands.
Just think about what that actually meant for a second. Real trust, in this incredibly extreme case, demanded three things. First, he had to surrender control and fight that natural urge to try and balance himself. Second, he had to become one with Blondin, a single unit of weight and motion. And third, he had to move in perfect unison. Any resistance, any little attempt to save himself would have killed them both.
It's because of this powerful story that Blondin became so much more than just a famous performer. His act turned into this enduring metaphor that has been echoing through history ever since.
I mean, his name literally became the verb for his craft. People didn't just walk a tightrope anymore, they were doing a Blondin.
But the story's influence went so much further than that, reaching all the way to the highest levels of power and faith.
This is just incredible. Get this, even the President of the United States used the metaphor. Right in the middle of the Civil War, Abraham Lincoln saw himself as Blondin, carefully trying to balance the fate of the entire nation in a wheelbarrow while he walked that treacherous rope of war.
And the power of this metaphor is just timeless. For more than a century now, pastors and theologians have used this exact story, the cheering crowd and the empty wheelbarrow, to ask a really fundamental question about faith. Is your faith just an intellectual belief, or is it a real trust that actually leads you to take action?
But its use is also deeply personal. In the world of therapy and coaching, the story works as a perfect metaphor for healing. It encourages people to learn to trust their own body, to trust the process of recovery, and to kind of sway with it, rather than fighting against it.
And so, ultimately, the story of the Great Blondin kind of forces us to ask ourselves that very same question in our own lives, in our relationships, in our careers, in our deepest beliefs. It's really easy to stand in the crowd and cheer, but what happens when you're the one who's asked to get in the wheelbarrow?